Like, it's okay to build wealth slowly. It's okay to build wealth in a boring fashion. Like, that's how most people get wealthy.
Welcome to Blind Spots, a podcast where we're helping you fill the gap between what you want to do with your money and what you actually do. We are professional investors, writers, and financial planners helping you navigate the complexities of finance to optimize what you can control and cut out the rest. Join your host, Nik Schuurmans and Erin Varghese, as we discuss the questions and nuances surrounding everyday money management. Investment advisory services offered through Pure Portfolios, a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Nik Schuurmans and Erin Varghese work for Pure Portfolios. Any opinions expressed by Nik and Erin or any podcast guest are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Pure Portfolios. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. It should not be construed as legal or tax advice and is not intended to replace the advice of a qualified attorney or tax professional. Clients of Pure Portfolios may maintain positions in securities discussed in this podcast. This information is not an offer or solicitation to buy or sell securities. The information contained may have been compiled from third-party sources and is believed to be reliable.
Welcome back to the Blind Spots podcast. Last episode, we talked about year-end to-dos and activities that you can do to wrap up the year and feel confident in your financial position going into the new year. And part of that discussion included simplicity around your finances. So today we are going to be doing a deep dive into how simple beats complex. So Nik, what was the genesis of this conversation?
Yeah, so I received a text at night from a client, and we were meeting the next day. And the text was rather long, and it was basically outlining how this client was speaking to an advisor friend. And the advisor friend was saying that a financial advisor should be digging into tax records, their trust, all of their assets, just digging into the weeds to every corner of a person's financial life. And I think that's true. But the way this advisor person framed it, she was trying to imply that perhaps our client and their advisor, us, had not really done the work and not gone deep enough. And so I was kind of taken aback by this. And there's multiple layers to this story that we can get to. But the overarching theme and takeaway was, at Pure Portfolios, we really try to take the complex and make it simple. Sure, we're doing the work. So all the stuff this advisor said to our client was true. Like, you want to understand what your client's balance sheet looks like, what makes them tick, their tax records, all of that. Like, you want to understand everything. I completely agree. But you want to take that complexity and present it to them in a digestible, simple format that's actionable. And in life, not just in financial planning, I think sometimes people mistake simple and actionable for not being sophisticated. So that's the premise of this episode. And I would argue that true complexity, true genius and sophistication is taking complex and making it simple.
So can you just give us a couple of examples of what it might look like for someone who has a complex situation and might need to simplify things, because everyone's financial situation is different. So what areas do you see that people might need to simplify?
Right. And I think, a good way to look at this problem that people might relate to is in every aspect of our lives, whether we're going to the doctor, if we're getting our car fixed, or if you're talking to a financial advisor, no one walks in and says, "Hey, doc," or "Hey, mechanic," or "Hey, advisor, make this as complicated as you possibly can. Like, present me a solution that'll make no sense to me, this elaborate thing that I can't really do anything with." No one says that. Okay. So again, back to my comment, true brilliance is taking the complex and making it simple. And that's what we try to do. So areas where I see people going off the rails and making their plan more complex than it needs to be, and there's many, here's the most common from my experience: loaning money to friends and family, maintaining 2 or 3 homes or more. So you're dealing with property taxes, maybe in different states. If you're renting it out, that's another layer of complexity from a tax standpoint. Accounts scattered everywhere. So someone with 6 different investment accounts at 5 different advisors or custodians, it makes it really hard to track, really hard to know what you own. If you're taking an RMD out of an IRA, you have to do it 4 or 5 times. If it's a taxable account, you have multiple 1099s, which is a nightmare for your CPA. Taking leverage, so borrowing money against their investment portfolio to do something. That could be loaning money to a friend or family member. It could be buying a second home. So these all kind of dovetail off each other. And I'll just rattle off a few more. Not letting go of their investment portfolio, so constantly consuming information from multiple sources, trying to meddle and making investment decisions outside of their sphere of expertise. And then the last one, and I think this is really important today, is not having your estate plan dialed in or not updated, right? People get remarried, they get divorced, they have grandkids, their goals change. So making sure the assets flow in the way that you intended and updating that estate plan every couple of years.
So a common problem we see is a phrase that you've coined as the serial tweaker. So what does that person do? What do they look like? What kind of qualities do they have? And when you come across someone who's a serial tweaker, what kind of advice or conversation do you have for them?
The serial tweaker, and that sounds like a drug addict. So we're not talking about a drug addict. We're talking about someone that they're always compelled to act. I mean, I love my mother, but she's a serial tweaker. She's always doing something. Some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't. So in the context of what we're talking about, a financial plan, a serial tweaker is someone that is never content. They're always making adjustments. They're always trying to fine tune something. And I can tell you, after almost 2 decades of doing this, a really good financial plan should be boring. It shouldn't be these huge, drastic actions from month to month or year to year. Sure, you can make tweaks around the margin. You can optimize the things that we can control. All the things that we preach are built within our framework. A serial tweaker is always compelled to do something. And what I tell people in 2021, boring is okay, and it's okay to do nothing. Because let's face it, the biggest risk to most people's plan and most people's investment portfolio is not the financial markets. It's really not. It's themselves. It's avoiding stupid stuff. Like, avoiding stupidity is brilliant. And I think that's an underrated thing. People always try to seek brilliance and seek doing the next best thing and the right thing and the brilliant thing. But oftentimes a sound plan can be ironclad just by avoiding dumb stuff. So a serial tweaker, I would say to serial tweakers, if you're compelled to do something, 99 times out of 100, you'd be better off doing nothing. It's okay to do nothing. That also is a choice. That also is a tactical move, doing nothing.
So for the person who is a serial tweaker, they're going to have a hard time probably hearing that advice or implementing it. So how much does their personal filter factor into how they can deal with being that kind of person?
Yeah, and this piggybacks on an episode that we did in a blog I wrote, that in modern times, in 2021, we're blitzed with information from every angle: friends and family, social media, financial media, the newspaper, anything, Twitter. Well, that's part of social media. But the point is, in the 80s, it was much quieter around us. Like, you would have to go seek information. You'd have to go to the library, or you'd have to pick up a newspaper. Now we're blitzed with stuff, even though we didn't really ask for it. And serial tweakers tend to consume everything. They tend to consume hundreds of ideas a day, and the human brain simply can't process that. So they take these ideas out of context and try to apply it to their own personal plan, and they end up making a mess of it. So by creating an information filter, a way to filter out the sea of noise and tighten that, so you're only consuming relevant information to you or your plan or your investment portfolio, that's a better way to keep you on track rather than consuming everything and trying to make sense of it.
So in thinking about the way that we consume information, things that we hear, how to filter out the information that applies to us and doesn't, what we should be paying attention to, there's a lot of people who feel like they need, in relation to their finances, just a really complicated plan. They need alternative investments, again, a complicated plan. How do you go about those conversations for someone who feels like they need the world?
Right. So there's a human tendency to, and this is more true today than ever, but FOMO, the fear of missing out, right? Bond yields are low. We've written about the 4% rule that might not be relevant in this interest rate environment. Equities, stocks have had a great run over the last 12 years. And there's this feeling that future returns are going to be lower, or the traditional asset classes and playbook won't work anymore. And that's debatable. right? It's certainly worked up to this point, and I've always said that the stock market is the greatest wealth creation engine ever made. But now things are being challenged by bond yields being low. You've got cryptocurrencies out there that are parabolic. You've got non-fungible tokens, alternative investments, all these crazy ideas. And I think there's a tendency to introduce things that, one, people don't understand, but two, that sound good, that are overly complicated, that they're nice and shiny and they're bright, and they think that it's going to add to their total return. And in reality, it probably doesn't. Like, you don't need to take that risk. Like, you don't need to like, if your financial plan works and your portfolio works, I'm not saying you can't look for other ideas, but one of the pillars is not taking risk, where the best case doesn't change your life, but the worst case can derail your plan. So I encourage people to check out alternative ideas on their own, but do it with a small portion of your investable assets. I've always said the best way to educate yourself is by owning something. So when Bitcoin came out and became mainstream in 2015, I wanted to learn more, so I bought some. And that's completely fine with a small percentage of your investable assets. But there's another layer to this too, where advisors in Wall Street, these folks that are paid to sell stuff, know that simple doesn't sell. So the more complex that they can make it, the more they can make you feel like you're missing out or that you don't know what's going on, and the easier that they can sell you. Like, know that any advisor, there's an army of psychology experts behind them, coaching them on how to pitch the novice investor and to make things confusing as possible, because that makes it seem like people need their services.
Yeah, you have a great quote where you've said that if you can understand the incentive, you can understand the advice. And I think that if more people really took that and applied it to the advice that they're being given, they would see that they really don't need all of these complex products and services and things.
So that's a Charlie Munger quote. He's a famous investor, and he's full of those types of quotes. I think that's a really good nugget. And I'm a firm believer that humans respond to incentives. So if you're getting pitched by someone and it seems too good to be true, or if it seems confusing and you're wondering how it fits in your plan and why it's good advice for you, ask them how they're paid. And any advisor that's worth their salt should be able to clearly explain the incentive backing the advice. And if you understand the incentive, the advice and their motivation for providing that advice should be clear.
Yeah, we have a really great one-page challenge on the Pure Portfolios blog that I'll link in the show notes that you can use with your advisor.
So the state of Massachusetts got sick of advisors not being forthright with their fees. So they came out with a regulatory document, and it's great. It itemizes every possible expense an advisor could charge you. And every Massachusetts-based financial advisor has to fill it out. And this should be uniform across the country, but lobbyists, Wall Street, don't really want the investing public to know what they're being paid. But I would encourage you to check that out, and we can link it in the show notes. But if you have any doubt or you don't know what you're paying your advisor, this is a great place to start.
Yeah, and the reason that I thought of that is because there are a lot of complicated products that sometimes can come along with investing. And so if you are unsure what you're paying, it's not usually directly on your statement. So I think that that's a good exercise to go through with your advisor to understand the advice that you've been given.
Well, and I know we sound like a broken record on this podcast. We tend to repeat the same pillars and values and behaviors and habits and all those things. But I don't think people can fully understand how often we see a portfolio or how often we meet a prospective client that has no clue how they're invested. They have no clue what they own. They have no clue what they're paying. Many think that they're paying a much lower fee than they're actually paying. They're unaware of conflicts of interest that their advisor might be subjecting them to. And it's easy to think that in 2021, with all the information out there, that people are making sound decisions and they're on top of it and they know what their advisor is charging and they know what they own. But I find more often than not, that's not the case. That is not the case. And these big Wall Street firms, these strip mall financial advisors that knock on people's doors and try to drum up business that way, like, they are absolutely gouging people. And again, if future returns are lower, if interest rates are lower, like what you pay to an advisor should be top of mind, and you should know exactly what it is.
Yeah, I always come back to thinking about if you don't understand something, then you shouldn't invest in it, or buy it or whatever. That applies to a lot of aspects of life. But there's a fine line between having a trusted advisor who can help you make decisions and kind of giving the reins over to them. But if you're not really understanding what they're doing, you can also get yourself into some trouble there as well.
Yeah,
So
and
questions.
ask questions, and we're not saying that you need to be bird dogging your advisor or need to know exactly what they're doing. But if you want to be involved and you want to have a partnership and you want to know what you're paying and why certain things are being done, that's part of the reason why we do this podcast. That's part of the reason why we do explainer videos. That's part of the reason why I've written a blog every week for the last 5+ years, because for those people that want to know, that information is available. For those people that trust us and are in tune or comfortable with what we're doing, they can detach and go on and live their life. That's why people hire us, so they can focus on the things that are important to them. But the worst of it is, if you want to be involved, you want to have a partnership, but you don't know what your advisor is doing, you don't have to do that in 2021. That is absurd to me, but so many people are still operating under that antiquated playbook.
Yeah, and this doesn't just apply to retirement where, your plan shouldn't, like you say, be bursting with fireworks. Even during your working times, boring is good.
I think that's true. People think that you need these large seismic shifts to build wealth and to keep wealth. It's okay to build wealth slowly. It's okay to build wealth in a boring fashion. That's how most people get wealthy. They are consistent with their saving. They live within their means, and they develop the right habits over their working years. And then at the end of the day, they poke their head up and they have a couple $1,000,000. They're debt free. That's building wealth slowly. It didn't take a huge shift in behavior. It didn't take a seismic action or an oracle ball about what the market does next. It's just repeatable, consistent, good money habits equal good outcomes. That's the bottom line. And it's the same for retirement.
Yeah.
We can say simple beat complex. Don't mistake simple and actionable for not sophisticated, or there's not brain power behind your plan. A sound retirement plan should be boring, and sometimes the best action and the best choice is doing nothing.
Alrighty, well, that about wraps up this week's episode of Blind Spots. We will see you in our next episode.